On the day my husband died, I said nothing about the $32 million inheritance or about the in-wall safe he'd left me in Port Oriole, right here in the house. That same night, my daughter-in-law screamed, "You're old! Sign it all over! Sign a quitclaim deed!" "All right," I said. Then I decided to do one thing, one sentence, that would freeze her where she stood. If you're watching this video, tell me where you're from or what time it is for you. If I failed today, I'd lose this house and the last piece of dignity my husband left in my hands. The house still smelled like lilies and coffee when the first voice cut through the clink of dishes. I kept my head down over the sink, letting hot water sting my knuckles while the dishwasher hummed low like a tired animal. Black dresses slipped past the doorway. A cousin stacked plates. Someone laughed about a parking ticket, then swallowed the sound like it had escaped by accident on a day when laughter was suspect. He would have wanted it this way, I said to no one in particular, to fill the gap where Arthur's voice should have been. The faucet sputtered. My hands shook. Heavy steps pooled in the doorway behind me. The room shrank to the size of the tile between my shoes. "Great, that's that," a woman announced, bright and hard enough to scratch glass. I set a plate into the rack. "Thank you for helping," I said softly. "He would have appreciated it. Cut it out, Greta." She stepped in far enough that her perfume edged out the lilies. Behind her, 3 figures arranged themselves like a tribunal. Cole, jaw set. Lila, brows tilted in practiced sympathy. Evan, not meeting my eyes, tugging at his cuff. "We need to talk about practical matters." The word practical did a slow, cold turn inside my ribs. "This house," she went on, "the business assets. Evan and I discussed it with his brother and sister. It's best if you start looking for your own place." "My own place?" I turned, drying my hands on a dish towel that still held Arthur's coffee stain from last week, a ghostly half moon. "Are you telling me to leave?" Lila cleared her throat. "What Viv means is, this place is too big for one person, and the upkeep—" "Are you telling me to leave?" I asked again. Viv smiled without warmth, the way you smile at a flight you've barely made after a tight connection. "You're 66, Greta. Dad took care of you while he was alive. Now it's time to be realistic. Downsize, something more appropriate." Appropriate settled between us, heavy and false. "I've lived here 16 years, I said. The clock on the wall ticked too loud. "And it's been lovely," Cole added carefully. "But Dad would want us to be practical. There are kids, college funds, retirement. He left a will, we're sure. And we'll honor whatever small provision." "Small," Viv repeated, already dividing the pantry with her eyes. "You weren't his partner. You didn't build anything. You were just there. Just there." The words landed like dropped silverware. The towel in my hands went still. The tile cooled under my heels. Somewhere in the living room, someone switched off the music. The house listened. "Pack your bags," Viv said. "Tonight is best. Evan and I can stay to manage the transition." Evan stared out the window. I waited for him to look at me. He didn't. I thought of the winter Arthur and I repainted the living room, him on that old ladder, paint in his hair, me laughing until I cried. I thought of the weeks before the end, the way he'd squeeze my fingers twice in the night for I'm here. I thought of the way grief is supposed to bind people. The way casseroles are supposed to show up in tidy stacks. I thought of the files no one knew existed, the ones with my name where they assumed his would be. "All right," I said. Viv blinked. "All right, I'll pack tonight." They had expected a scene, a refusal, something to make me small enough to excuse their impatience. I went back to the plates, the ordinary weight of them good in my hands. Behind me, murmurs, footsteps releasing pressure down the hall, the hush of people dividing a life by whisper. When the dishwasher clicked into its cycle, I let a small smile run its course where no one could see. If invisibility was what they wanted, I could make it a weapon. I packed 2 suitcases, not 3, dresses folded over tissue. The blue suit Arthur said made me look like weather after rain, a sweater with one elbow gone soft. Jewelry stayed. Art stayed. All of it stayed, bait on a clean white plate. I took what I needed, the deed I needed, and a thin folder that had nothing to do with their father. I took the key to my own future and tucked it into the lining of my purse. Baylight Motor Inn didn't blink when I checked in under my maiden name. The carpet was loud. The clerk's nails were louder. She slid me a key card without a second look. The room smelled like lemon cleaner and the faint memory of someone else's cologne. I stood at the window, watched taillights fade to a red thread, and let grief crawl onto the bed beside me like a last heavy animal settling for the night. Then I got to work. The first call I made was to Simon Everly. He'd handled paperwork for Arthur for 25 years, and for me for 15, though handled was a polite word for what we'd truly built, a quiet fortress nobody admired because nobody knew it existed. "I'm sorry for your loss," he said, voice low, tired in the way only the honest get tired. "Thank you," I said. "Can you meet me tomorrow? Not at your office." "Of course. Text me where." We met in the hotel's tiny breakfast room at the corner booth that looked least like anyone had cried there this week. I set a plate of canapés between us. He set his leather briefcase down like it was a sleeping child. "How bad?" he asked. I told him about the kitchen, about just there, about being erased with the speed of a wedding band slipped off under a faucet. His jaw tapped once, a small muscle ticking. "Do they have any idea?" "None." I folded my hands. My ring wasn't on, but the indent was. Arthur and I decided years ago, his pride, my preference. Let them assume. It kept the peace. "You still want to proceed the way we discussed?" He tapped the briefcase. "We can make preliminary transfers within 60 hours. The rest will take 10 business days. Everything's clear. You've had primary ownership for more than a decade. They can contest if they want to waste money." "I don't mind a little theater," I said, "but I'd like the exits mapped and the ushers paid." His smile was quick and real. "They'll learn." After he left, I drove to the curb across from the house. I didn't pull into the driveway. I didn't need the neighbor's eyes. From behind tinted glass, I watched a moving truck pull up. Hazard lights blinking like a secular prayer. Men in gray shirts rolled dollies across the walk. Viv stood on the porch, arms crossed, directing traffic with the authority of a person born to claim other people's furniture. I had planned to be patient, to let them settle into their own fiction, let it grow heavy and comfortable so it would hurt more when it split. Watching that truck, I adjusted the plan without heat or haste. Adjustment has been my secret power longer than anyone knew. Reversal. I would not wait 2 weeks to tighten every bolt. I would do it now. At Harbor State Bank, the lobby had the calm of a church on a weekday afternoon, empty, echoing, everyone whispering. My banker met me in a private room with water in glass bottles and a folder already tabbed. She offered condolences with the practiced grace of someone who's delivered that sentence too many times. "I need to trigger the transfers we discussed," I said. "Immediately." "Immediately." We signed. She notarized. She clicked through screens that made quiet, permanent changes to 16 years of assumptions. When she slid the final form toward me, her eyes flicked down at a number she hadn't expected to see in a woman in a simple navy cardigan who looked like somebody's tired aunt. "Greta," she said softly, careful with my name like it might bruise. "Would you like me to—" "I'd like privacy," I said, just as softly, "and a cashier's check for operating expenses on the Riverside Exchange downtown. Tenants like predictability." Back at the hotel, my phone lit up with Evan's name. I let it go to voicemail. The message was earnest and sloppy. Viv had found confusing paperwork in Arthur's desk. Could I explain? I deleted it. Confusion is a good teacher if you give it a quiet room and a night to pace. I ordered soup and a turkey club. The TV murmured about weather and a game I didn't care about. The ice machine rattled down the hall, and for a moment, grief stepped in with a paper cup of water and sat on the bed's edge, polite as a pastor. Arthur's laugh lived in the corners of the room. I could find it when I turned my head just right. I let it stay. I didn't have to choose between sadness and strategy. Both had room. The next morning, the hotel's business center was 2 computers and a printer that coughed up pages like it was surprised they existed. I sent documents to Simon. I scheduled an inspection for a building Evan didn't know I owned. I answered an email from Javier Ruiz about an elevator with a personality and an attitude. I talked to a contractor about a roof. I paid an invoice. I breathed, kinetic beat. A knock at the door. I checked the peephole. A bellman held out an envelope on a tray, like a movie that knew exactly what genre it was. Inside, a letter on Everly and Sloan letterhead, the name embossed in a font that tried too hard. "Please attend the formal reading of the will," it said, in the perfectly polite voice of a man who would faint if asked to manage a real crisis. I smiled. Theater. In the afternoon, I parked a block from the house again. The truck was gone. A child's scooter leaned against my porch. A new wreath hung on my door. Cheerful burlap that looked too expensive for how little it meant. Viv came out carrying a stack of my cookbooks, spines faded with flour, mouth in a line that said she was already bored. Cole followed with a box labeled study. Evan trailed behind with a laundry basket full of towels I had bought, washed, folded 100 times. Reversal held. I had hoped to give them rope. Instead, I would hand them a clock. Back at the hotel, I laid everything on the bed. Keys, deed copies, letters. My grandmother's jade bracelet because it made me brave. The moss green leather planner Arthur used to call my operations book, which made him laugh and made me roll my eyes. I packed a tote with what I'd need for Monday, when the will would be read in a room I could already smell. Polish, dust, aftershave. I packed resolve too. It fits anywhere, even when the suitcase is full. Sleep comes when it wants, not when asked. In the space between 2 and 3 a.m., I dreamed Arthur was back on the aluminum ladder, freckled with paint, grinning down while I studied the rungs and pretended not to worry. "We'll do the trim tomorrow," he said in the dream. I woke with my hand curled like it remembered the level and the rail. The morning of the reading, the sky went gray and stayed there, a dull metal lid over the city. I chose a navy suit, the one he liked. I clasped my grandmother's jade and thought of her hands, nimble, certain. The Harborview Hotel lobby, where I'd moved for the night to remind myself who I was, had polished floors and fresh flowers on a round table the size of a kiddie pool. The receptionist smiled as if I were a regular. Maybe I was. Maybe I'd always been the woman who knows how to walk into a room exactly on time and let silence do its work. At Everly and Sloan, the receptionist was 25, glossy, not cruel, just young. She called me ma'am and looked at my shoes. In the conference room, chairs waited in 2 neat ranks like opposing teams. I sat on one side with Simon. Across the table, Viv gathered her troops, Cole tight as a fist, Lila quick with intake breath, Evan pale, eyes flicking to the door and back. They were dressed for victory. It made me want to put a hand on each cheek and tell them a bedtime story about hubris and how even hubris needs a nap. When the attorney cleared his throat, I sat straighter. The usual words marched past. Sound mind, last will, distributions, charities. The air in the room shifted when real numbers arrived. A whisper of fabric, the click of a pen, a small involuntary sound from Lila that might have been a laugh or a sob. I didn't look at them. I looked at my folded hands and breathed in for 4, out for 4, the way the nurse taught me on the day Arthur couldn't catch his own breath. I kept my gaze on the map I'd already drawn. There would be time for the reveal, time for documents and names and the long slide of paper across the table that changes a life mid-sentence. For now, my job was simple. Remember who I was before any of them decided I was just there. Hold that woman steady at the center of the room and let everything else orbit her like it always did without admitting it. When it ended, the silence felt like standing on a dock after the boat has pulled away. Behind me, someone exhaled through their teeth. Across from me, Viv reached for a word and missed. I stood. Simon rose with me. The attorney said something courteous that meant nothing. I thanked him as if it did. In the hallway, the carpet swallowed our footsteps. "Ready for the rest?" Simon asked. "I was ready 15 years ago," I said. "Today, I get to stop pretending." We stepped out into a drizzle so fine it felt like a secret. I tilted my face to it and tasted the city. Metal and new leaves, coffee and exhaust. A clean start that wasn't sudden or cinematic, just solid as the ground under my shoes. That night, back in my own quiet room, I wound the pocket watch. 96 hours is both a lifetime and a blink when you're packing up a story you told yourself for years. I let the number sit under the schedule tab, and I let it glow inside me too. Not as a threat, as a boundary. I brushed my hair. I set the jade in its dish. I turned off the lamp. The dark was soft and kind. Somewhere beyond the window, the city moved like it always does, indifferent to anyone's drama. I smiled into the dark. Tomorrow, the real work would begin. The morning after the reading, I made the bed like a nurse making a corner, square, tight, precise, then sat on the edge and looked at the clean lines I'd made. Order is a language, and I speak it when the rest of me wants to go quiet. The breakfast room rattled with waffle irons and the sigh of the orange juice machine. I took the far table near the fake ficus and opened my notebook. Step 1. Notes from yesterday. What was said? What wasn't? What faces do when habit breaks? Step 2. Calls. I started with Javier Ruiz. Routine updates, I told him. Put everything in writing. No verbal approvals for a while. Paper is our friend. Understood, he said. Efficient, unruffled. I like the people who treat my voice like any other client's. Not surprised, not deferential. Competence is a calm room with the windows open. Next, Harbor State Bank. 2 more operating accounts, I said. Segmented for maintenance reserves. Keep the original account active for rent flow. We'll do internal transfers on a standing date, the first business day after the 15th. Teresa Morales nodded. We didn't say condolences. We didn't say anything that could be misheard as weakness. She sent me forms that landed in my inbox crisp and complete, ready for my initials that look like someone else's. When my hand trembled, I ordered my mail to a downtown box, then filed forwarding requests for everything related to the properties, and none of what would rile them before I was ready. Invisibility isn't vanishing. It's choosing which light you stand in. By 10, my phone started to ache with messages. Unknown number. We found a life insurance policy. Call me. Another. You need to return the SUV Dad paid for. Title says company. A third. Where are the keys to the safe? Then Lila, soft where the others went hard. Can we meet? Just us. Coffee. Grief is complicated. Strategy isn't. I texted Simon. They're rummaging, I wrote. We stay quiet for 60 hours. Yes. He called within a minute, his voice with that worn velvet quality that only comes after a career triangulating between law and manners. Yes, he said. Silence is a rope. People choose whether to climb or hang themselves with it. Graphic, I said, but I smiled. My coffee had gone cold. I drank it anyway. The body sometimes wants penalties to match occasions. At noon, I went for a walk. The air stayed stubbornly at 62 degrees Fahrenheit and tasted like rain that couldn't commit. I passed a woman in a red coat, walking a dog with a white face, and the kind of faithful eyes that make you consider picking up a leash just to see what it feels like to belong to something again. At the corner, a man sold roses from a bucket. I didn't buy any. I wanted the room to smell like nothing but what it was. When I came back, there was a voicemail from Evan. I sat on the bed to listen. Greta, he began, and stopped so long I heard the little hiss of the line. Hey, there's just a lot from the lawyer. It's all different than we thought. Another pause. Do you want to go through Dad's desk with me? Just us? I thought we'd do that. And the voice of the boy he'd been snuck through the man he'd become. It made my chest go warm and then cold. People tell you grief is about the one who died. Sometimes it's also about all the versions of the living you miss. I set the phone down. My hand went to the jade at my wrist and rested there, like you rest a hand on a sleeping dog to feel its breath. Then I stood and went to the business center. The printer argued with me and lost. I left with 3 manila envelopes. One was a notice to tenants about new autodraft information. Neutral tone, cheerful font. 2 was a letter to Anika Shah confirming year-end plans. Dates in MMDDYYY. Over time, I've learned that a person who gets their dates right does a dozen other things right without having to say so. And 3 was my own list, typed and clipped, labeled schedule. At the house, the porch wore their wreath like a joke. I parked half a block down and stayed put, watching. The curtains were open where I keep them half closed. My grandmother's quilt was folded wrong, a square of mustard yellow showing that belongs on the underside. Someone had moved the living room chair to a new angle that made the whole place look off balance, like a person favoring a bad knee. A delivery van stopped, and the driver jogged to the door with a padded mailer. The door opened on Cole's frown. He took the envelope like it owed him rent. I didn't go in. I had the right, and I owned more of that right than any of them knew, but I didn't go in. Right isn't always the same thing as useful. Back at the hotel, I put on a cardigan, then took it off, then put it on again. I called Callum Reed for Riverside Exchange, then another locksmith for Granary Works 2 miles away. "Callum," I said, "master set for me, new fobs, reset the keypad, tenants get their keys tomorrow morning with a cheery note about preventive security. Bill me." I sent Simon a copy of the schedule supplement to the Lane Family Living Trust I'd insisted on 5 years ago. It codified what we'd practiced for more than a decade, a quiet, sturdy bridge between my legal ownership and our private life. He replied with a single line. "Good. We'll need the language by page and paragraph when they try to perform theater in the lobby of righteousness." Messages from the house escalated at dusk. "Viv, you have 30 days to vacate per state law. Consider this notice." She attached a photo of a printed form dated today, a box checked beside Other, where she'd written in tight, small script, "Change in family ownership." I laughed, a small, delighted sound that surprised me with its brightness. Theater indeed. I forwarded it to Simon. His reply came with a lawyer's energy-saving economy I cherish. "Invalid on 3 counts. Please do not engage." So I didn't. I ordered soup. I ate half. Not because I wasn't hungry, but because I wanted to remember what it feels like to leave something you want on purpose. Power is choosing, even small. At 9, the hotel phone rang. I let it ring through and watched the red message light blink like a tiny lighthouse for shipwrecked plans. I brushed my teeth, laid out clothes for morning, and slid the schedule tab under the notebook on the bedside table. The first item on the list lit up at me: utilities. I'd moved most of them to my accounts years ago, a compromise. Arthur called it practical. I called it leverage if the world went crooked. Practical leverage is a terrible phrase, but a useful thing. I woke early and called the power company while the breakfast room still smelled like waffles and new paper. "New billing address," I said. "No service changes." I did the same for water, for trash, for the maintenance contractor who comes every 6 months to remind the house that roofs need friends. "Will anyone call to verify?" the woman on the trash account asked. "They might," I said. "Send them to my attorney." I gave Simon's number. Outsourcing is peace, 1 minute at a time. By 10, an email from Anika Shah arrived. "I'll need updated signature cards for the trusts," she wrote. "Also, condolences." It was the only time that day anyone remembered softness without weaponizing it. Around lunchtime, I got the first real pinch. A text from an unfamiliar number with a photo of the office at the Lane house. Drawers pulled, piles made with a stranger's logic. Statements, letters, a list Arthur kept in neat blue ink of the plants we killed and the plants we didn't, spread like cards on the carpet. The caption read, "Come explain yourself like a civilized person." I stared at the photo until my eyes found the small, insignificant thing I'd left as a beacon. A train ticket clipped to a pressed ginkgo leaf from a trip we took on a whim years ago. It rained for 2 days, and we never minded because we sat under a tin roof and played cards and ate crackers with peanut butter and called it a feast. The corner of the gold leaf peeked from beneath the pile, unbothered. You can change everything, but a corner still shows. I set my phone down. I think we should reinforce this wall, the contractor said on speaker, talking about granary works. Previous owner cut a chunk to run ducting. It's ugly and it's not up to code. Do it, I said. Send photos. Bill me. Warm satisfaction moved through me. Money sent towards something that will stand. At 2, Lila called. I answered. I can weather wind from the north. I do better with rain. Hi, she said, voice bright and too fast. Hi, I wanted to, are you working? You? She exhaled, trying to keep the peace. The energy here is... She let the sentence wave a white flag. Look, we found things that don't make sense. Because they weren't visible before, I said. Visibility and sense are often confused. That's a good line, she said, not unkindly. Please, can we meet? I can come to you. Just coffee. I won't bring anyone. I won't tell anyone. I looked at the schedule tab in the moss green planner. Not today, I said. Send your questions through Simon, or write them down and bring them Monday when we meet to sign what we need to sign. Monday, she repeated like a far-off place on a weather map. Okay. Take a walk, I said, surprising us both. Eat something with protein. Switch off the lights in the rooms you're not using. Houses notice that. She made a small sound that might have been a laugh. Okay, she said again, smaller. Okay. After we hung up, I stood at the window and watched the parking lot choreography. A boy on a skateboard carved long S-curves while his mother pretended not to watch from her car. A couple in their 70s held hands like they'd invented the technology. The light went a particular gray that means you should find your umbrella just in case. The ordinary world performed its matinee. At 4, Viv found the email address I use for tenant notices. We can avoid ugliness if you sign a quick claim deed, she wrote. We will ensure you are not left destitute. Destitute. Such a drama school word. The attachment was a document downloaded from a website that promises law by the yard. My name was misspelled. I forwarded it to Simon with a note. Keep for scrapbook. His reply was frameworthy. At 5, Javier Ruiz confirmed the rekey was complete and the tenants had their new fobs, with canales. Thanks for being part of our little building family, he said. Too much? Just enough, I said. You don't have to be sentimental to understand that people like to be told it's okay to belong. Dinner was soup again. I ate all of it this time. At 7, I opened the planner, flipped to schedule, wound the pocket watch, and circled 3 items: insurance, inventory, lines. Insurance took 20 minutes and my patient voice. Inventory took longer. I used the hotel notepad and wrote the big things to soothe the little voice that wanted to catalog every spoon. The street fair painting that cost $72 and looks like 6 a.m., the stack of quilts, the photo drawer, the recipe box with the grease spot over roast chicken. Then I wrote what mattered more. Arthur's watch, not for the metal, but for the scratches. The way the banister feels at the turn. The click the back door makes, that means you didn't pull it tight enough. Lines meant people. Who gets to me? Who doesn't? I drew a line through Viv and Cole. I left Evan blank and felt the way you do at the edge of a pool, knowing you'll have to jump eventually. I drew a squiggly line next to Lila and wrote, perhaps. The phone rang again. Unknown number. I let it ring. 30 seconds later, a text. We're changing the locks in the morning. I typed and erased 5 replies before setting the phone down. Simon texted without my asking. If they change any locks, it's evidence for us, not them. I slept like a person who had made enough decisions for one day. In the middle of the night, I woke and listened to the HVAC's low hum, the ice machine's occasional cough, and thought of the house breathing without me. It's all right, I told the dark. I'm not a thief. I'm a steward. Morning brought rain that remembers what commitment is. I pulled on boots and a coat and drove to a big box store where people buy plastic bins to sort an entire life. I bought nothing. Buying used to be a story about who I imagined I'd become. The truth is, I already had enough boxes. At exactly 10, I parked 2 blocks from the Lane house. A security company van idled out front. Viv stood on the porch with a clipboard, like a child playing manager of a store she doesn't quite understand. The tech went in, came out, went back in with a new cylinder in a clear clamshell. The porch light, the one I set on a timer years ago, clicked off at 10:15. Stubborn as ever. I texted Simon, "They're changing locks." He replied, "Good." By noon, Harbor State Bank called to confirm the standing transfers. Teresa Morales said, "Everything's in place. We'll send you alerts when the first batch runs." "Thank you," I said, and meant more than the conversation deserved. In the afternoon, I stopped by Beacon Atelier, the old brick studio with the uneven steps, once a headache, and then a small joy when we rented to artists who pay on time and bring canelés at the holidays. The hallway smelled like clay and coffee. 2 tenants started toward me to hug. Seeing my face, they offered the alternative, hands pressed briefly to their hearts, like we were all members of the same wordless club that meets in the unlit rooms of ordinary days. I posted the new notice by the mailboxes and left a stack of extra copies, because somebody always loses theirs and hates to ask. Back in the car, I watched the rain serve the city a rinse cycle. The wipers beat a rhythm my heart wanted to follow. I let it. The pinch came sharp at 3, a text from an unlisted number with a photo of my grandmother's jade bracelet in someone's palm. "These," the caption read, "heirlooms should stay with family." The hand wasn't Evan's. It wasn't Lila's. Veins stood up like decisions made too quickly. My fingers went cold and then hot. The bracelet was with me, warm on my wrist under the cardigan, the clasp as familiar as my own knuckle. The photo was from an old album. They lifted the past and pretended it was the present. I let my breath out slow and called Simon. "They're playing dirty," I said. "Then they're scared," he said. "Pinch received. Do nothing. People yell loudest when their bench is shallow." After I hung up, I sent a single message to the family group thread, the one none of us had ever used. "Please direct all legal questions to Simon Everly. For non-legal matters, I'll be at the house Monday 9:45 a.m. to review papers and personal items. I'll stay 75 minutes until 11 Hunquoc. Thank you." Viv replied within a minute, "You don't get to schedule us." I didn't answer. A boundary isn't a conversation. It's a fence with a gate that opens on a schedule. I stopped by the hotel laundry room and fed a handful of quarters to a machine that complains no matter what you give it. While my clothes swam in their warm circle, I sat on the plastic chair by the ice machine and wrote another list. At the top, what do I want? Then I drew a line and wrote instead, what needs doing? An older couple came in, gently debating whether the dryer needed another quarter. "It's fine," he said. "It's warm enough." "It's not about warm," she said. "It's about dry." I liked her immediately. Back upstairs, I folded laundry on the bed and thought of all the women who've used hotel linens as a table for the small paperwork of survival. Letters, bills, the next day's outfit that must look like a life you control. Evening arrived with a last lull. The phone settled. Email quieted. The rain softened. I sat cross-legged on the bed and opened the recipe box I'd taken from the bottom drawer years ago and never returned. The cards smelled like nutmeg and onions, like every Sunday that ever happened. On the back of roast chicken, Arthur had written in pencil, "Add lemon if you want to be fancy." I closed my eyes, let grief touch the card, then let it go. At 9, Evan texted, "I didn't know." About the building, the accounts, any of it. He never told us. I thought... The sentence bumped into the dark and stayed there. I typed and erased, then sent, "There's a lot none of us said." A truth, not a trap, not a gift, just a place to put our feet for a second. His reply came a long minute later. "See you Monday." No emojis, no apology, just a line that could become a bridge or a fence, depending on who we chose to be that day. I set the schedule tab on top of the notebook, not tucked beneath anymore, and placed the wound pocket watch beside it. "Tomorrow," I told it. For the first time, it felt less like a threat and more like a promise I'd made to myself about the kind of woman I could be when no one else gets to define me. I turned off the light and lay in the particular dark of a room that isn't yours, where the shapes all mean something else. The air unit clicked. The rain muttered its ongoing argument with the roof. The jade warmed on my wrist, resting against the bone like a small, patient animal. Invisible on purpose isn't the same as erased. It's the stance of a person choosing when to step into the light she already paid for. In the morning, I'd bring tea cakes and canapés for the tenants, sign more papers, and answer fewer messages. I'd drive past the Lane house and let it be a house for a day. I'd make one pot of soup on the hot plate I bought and didn't need. I'd keep the gate closed, the fence repaired, and the key on a ring no one else carried. And then Monday would come, and with it, the next necessary thing. Monday came dressed like a court clerk, dull, gray, exact, indifferent to feelings. I woke before the alarm and lay still, listening to the hush between heating cycles, the way a room breathes when it's waiting for you to decide what kind of day you're going to have. I ironed the navy suit until the seams looked like they'd considered my case and ruled in my favor. I fastened the jade, then tucked a square of tissue under the clasp the way my grandmother used to, so it wouldn't catch a hair at the nape. The mirror offered me the sort of face women earn, lines for laughter, deeper ones for the days you keep going anyway. At 9 a.m., I bought a dozen tea cakes and canapés because dignity and sugar get along. I wrote "thank you" on the box in my neatest hand, as if the day were already over and everyone had behaved. At 9:25, I met Simon Everly in the Harborview lobby. He carried his leather briefcase and the particular calm that makes unprepared people nervous. "Ready?" he asked. "I've been ready 16 years, I said. Sometimes confidence needs to hear itself out loud. We parked half a block from the Lane house. The porch still wore their burlap wreath. The timer I'd set years ago switched the porch light off at 9:44, like a stagehand who knows his cues. The security van was gone. The air smelled like wet pavement and coffee from a neighbor's kitchen. I checked the pocket watch. 9:45. We stay 75 minutes until 11 Hunquak, I said. We don't argue, we read. Simon said, which in his language means, I have remembered every necessary statute and also where you've hidden the moral of the story. At 9:45 on the dot, I knocked. Footsteps. A pause long enough to hold 3 assumptions and a sigh. The door opened on Viv, holding a clipboard like a shield. Cole hovered behind her, jaw squared. Lila stood in the foyer with hands clasped at her waist, the universal sign for, I'd like to be the translator today. Evan was farther back near the hall table where I used to toss the mail, and he used to toss his keys. You're late, Viv said, eyes flicking to my jade as if it were an insult. I'm on time, I said, and stepped in. We'll take the dining room, please. And Simon followed, and the small invasion of his presence, professional, male, briefcase, moved the molecules in the room. The dining room smelled faintly of furniture polish applied to a conscience. Someone had centered last fall's wreath, gold leaves, paper acorns, in the middle of my table as a decoration and a declaration. I set the tea cakes and canapés beside it and slid the wreath gently to one side. I'll stay 75 minutes, I said, placing the pocket watch on the table and winding it. The second hand ticked, not to count down, but to remind them the watch is wound. We're here to read documents and clarify what the will did and did not do. We're not here to relitigate the last 16 years. Viv's mouth twitched, small, controlled. We spoke to the attorney, she said. He said the will leaves the residuary estate to the children, the house, the business. The will governs what the will controls, Simon said, pleasant as if discussing the weather. Some assets were not in the probate estate at the time of death. We'll review those now. Cole folded his arms. This is our father's house. I opened the first manila folder and slid out the copies, 3 hole punched with tabs. There are battles and there's presentation. Let's begin with ownership, I said. You'll find a recorded deed dated 04/21/2015, transferring legal title to the Lane Family Living Trust, revocable, of which I am trustee. The trust held the house for living purposes. Arthur signed with full capacity, 2 witnesses and a notary. Recording stamp at the top right. Viv didn't reach. I set her copy within a respectful, undeniable distance of her hand. Lila took hers, like a person carrying a plate at a church supper. Cole snatched his as if velocity could change ink. Evan didn't move until I placed a copy on the edge of the hall table within his reach. He slid it toward himself with 2 fingers, as if it might startle. "You hid this," Viv said softly, each syllable a step down into her own echo. "No," I said. "We protected what we built. We also protected my right to remain in my home, regardless of anyone's opinions about what I contributed." Simon opened his briefcase and produced another set. "This is the trust certification," he said. "The 2-page document banks and service providers accept in lieu of full terms. It confirms the existence of the trust, the name of the trustee," he inclined his head toward me, "and the powers necessary to manage trust property. It does not disclose beneficiaries because that isn't required for any legitimate purpose. The will you heard read is a pour-over. It pours any probate assets into this same trust. That's why the will sounded simple. It is." Cole slapped a palm against the table. The wreath wobbled. "So you took everything." "I kept a home and the stewardship of the buildings I already owned," I said, voice level. "The trust contains instructions for distributions, yes, including to you, all at various times and under certain conditions. We'll get there." "But no, Cole, I didn't take everything. Your father and I arranged our lives in a way that made sense for the 2 people who lived them, not the 4 people who speculated about them." Lila turned a page, then another. She'd always been a good student. You don't lose that just because grief makes everything taste like metal. "I don't understand," she said. "Why not put it all in the will? Why this outside thing?" "Because wills are public," Simon said mildly, "and grief has a way of summoning notaries with gossip in their hearts. Trusts are private, and they set continuity in motion the moment you need it, not months later when a courthouse finally looks your way." Viv leaned in, both palms on the table, nails pale and perfect. "You don't get to keep what isn't yours," she said. "Dad built the business. We get the house. That's how this works." "You're describing a story," I said. "Not a contract." Evan's voice came from the doorway. Did he write anything to us?" There was a texture in it I hadn't heard since he was 22 and asked if a broken heart could crack a rib. "Yes," I said. "He did." The second envelope held a letter with his careful block print on the outside, for the kids. The air shifted when I set it down. Even Viv's anger tilted its head to listen. I didn't make a ceremony of opening it. I slid my thumb under the flap and unfolded the pages. It wasn't long. Arthur was never long. Brief, precise, like a good recipe card. Simple title, short list, strong results. My throat tightened on the first line, and for a second I saw him on the stepladder, paint in his hair, the grin he saved for when I pretended not to worry. I read, not for drama, but so there would be no arguments later about whether I'd softened or sharpened what he meant. He wrote that he loved them, each by name. And then, wise to the way words are weighed, he wrote that love wasn't an estate asset to be distributed, and so he wouldn't try. He wrote that he had transferred the house years earlier to make sure I would never have to change addresses because someone else changed moods. He wrote that I had managed the buildings for years and that without me, the roofs would leak, the tenants would leave, and what they thought of as money would evaporate in the sun. He wrote that the trust would pay them, yes, but that none of them was ready to be a landlord or a steward, not yet, and that I was both. He wrote there would be a time for them to step forward if they chose to do the work that earns a title other than heir. He ended with a line that sounded exactly like him. "Treat Greta with respect. She is not your obstacle. She is the reason you have anything to inherit at all." I folded the letter and slid it back into the envelope. No one breathed. In the schedule binder, the wound pocket watch ticked. 42 minutes. Viv gave one short laugh, a single syllable of disbelief. "Convenient," she said. "No witnesses except the 2 of you. Inventory and a temporary close. We did a thing families should only ever do with laughter. We sorted a life into piles. I kept to small things because small things tell the truth. Vacation photos, a handful of postcards, a framed picture of a long-gone dog who, in my opinion, would have given better counsel than anyone in this room today. I made lists. Lila found a notebook and made copies. Cole, surprised by a photo of himself at 12 with dandelion hair and a crooked grin, forgot to be furious for a full minute. Viv excused herself twice and returned with a face ironed flat. At minute 40, Evan picked up a photo of his father and me painting the living room. We were spattered and happy. His arm was around my waist. My hand steadied the ladder. The wall behind us was half primed, a map of what we meant to do. "I didn't know you did this," he said, not accusing. Not anything but the quiet wonder of a grown child. "We did a lot you didn't know," I said gently. "That's what adults do. We build, and we let the building be enough." He swallowed. "Okay," he said. "Okay." At minute 50, I opened the last envelope. "This is a courtesy," I said, "not a threat. It's a letter to the tenants at Riverside Exchange, reminding them of options to defer rent if they're having a rough patch. It isn't your business, but I want you to know that when I say stewardship, I mean people, not just roofs." Viv stared at the letterhead instead of the words. "They get kindness," she said, not bothering to hide the edge. "And we get homework." "You get money," I said, "and a way to learn how not to ruin where it comes from." Simon glanced at the pocket watch in the schedule binder and gave a small nod that said he appreciated choreography. "5 minutes," he murmured. I took one last look around the room. The light fell at the angle it always does at this hour, a clean pane across the table. Dust motes performed their daily ballet. My hands wanted to smooth the runner, but I let it be, a tiny rebellion against perfection's appetite. "Wednesday at 10 o'clock, I said, gathering the remaining copies into my folder. "I'll bring tea cakes and canapés again, not because anyone deserves them," I added, letting one corner of my mouth tilt, "but because the woman I am brings pastries. It helps me remember I can be gracious without being a doormat." Viv bared her teeth in something that wanted to be a smile if fed more often. "You won't get away with this," she said quietly. I picked up the pastry box, and my jade caught the light. "I already did," I said. Then softer, because I meant it. "And I wish you didn't need it to feel like somebody else's loss for it to be anyone's gain." Lila touched my sleeve. "Thank you for reading the letter," she said. She didn't say sorry. I didn't require it. Evan walked us to the door. "If I take the stewardship course," he said, voice low so it wouldn't turn into community theater for the foyer, "do I have to be a landlord?" "No," I said. "You can just be a man who understands the difference between an asset and a life. That helps." "Okay," he said again, that word becoming in his mouth something like consent to be decent. "See you Wednesday." Outside, the sky considered rain and decided to postpone. Simon and I walked to the car in a silence that wasn't empty. When we slid in, he exhaled, a long, pleased sound. "Midpoint," he said, as if naming a place on a map. "I felt it," I said. Something shifted. "You handed them a mirror and a calendar," he said. "People hate both. Good work." Back at the hotel, I set the pastry box on the little desk and laughed because I'd forgotten to leave it. I ate one on principle, sugar, fat, and flour, and the relief of a room where no one was pretending to be better than they were. My phone hummed with messages I didn't open. I sent one email to Anika Shah. "Confirm Wednesday inventory 10 o'clock, neutral location. Bring forms for item receipts." She replied within a minute. "Confirmed. I'll wear flats." I opened the schedule binder and drew a line through reading. My hand trembled once, the way a field shivers when the wind changes direction. Then steadiness returned like a friend arriving late but bringing good gossip. For the first time since the funeral, I let myself lie down in the middle of the day. I don't nap. It's always felt like borrowing from a future account you'll be too tired to repay. Today the bed gathered me in with the unjudging generosity of cheap hotel sheets. When I woke, The light had tilted a degree toward afternoon, and the room held the quiet of a house that approves of what you've done. I made tea. I called the property manager and asked about the elevator with attitude at Riverside Exchange. "It's flirting with death, but not committed," she said. "We'll coax it through the week." "Give it what it needs," I said, amused that kindness extends to machinery without anyone arguing. My phone buzzed. A single text from Evan. I was wrong. No punctuation. I stared at it for a long moment, not because I needed it. I'd moved without that permission for years, but sometimes the smallest truth, offered late, can still rest somewhere useful. I typed, "We were all younger than we knew," and set the phone face down. Not an ending, a pause. At dinner, the soup tasted like something earned. I washed the spoon and left it to dry, a little flag of surrender to the day's goodness. I wound the pocket watch to 96 hours and let the hand run. Not as a threat, but as a corridor to the next room I would walk into with my head up. The reading was over. The story had changed tense. I wasn't arguing with ghosts anymore. I was enforcing gravity. On Wednesday, I'd bring tea cakes and canapés and the forms, and a kindness that isn't soft, but is warm enough to keep a person honest in a drafty house. After that, the showdown at the door. After that, the part that matters more than any deed, choosing what kind of woman I get to be in a life I named for myself. Wednesday, inventory and theater. I arrived with tea cakes and canapés, a clipboard, and flats that said, "We're here to work." The clouds hung heavy, like a judge who's seen this case before. Anika Shah met me on the walk. "Neutral," she said, tapping her tote. Clipboard, carbon copies, receipt sheets. "Flats?" I asked. She lifted her hem an inch. "Naturally." The doorbell chimed. Ding-dong. The sound of grocery lists and ordinary Wednesdays. Today, it sounded like a warning. Viv Cross opened the door in a sweater the color of snow you don't trust. Her eyes took in the tote, my jade, the pastry box, and rotated 1 degree to the side. Admission without welcome. "We'll be an hour," I said, stepping past. "Inventory only. Then I'll be gone until 12:30 p.m. Friday." "Why Friday?" she asked, the way a person asks why gravity works. "Because the watch is wound. 96 hours, I said softly. "And you already know what that's for." The dining table wore last fall's wreath and a stack of dish towels I didn't buy. Anika set up like a triage nurse. Forms, pens, a tiny stapler clicking like a metronome finding tempo. Lila hovered, eager to be helpful and careful not to be conspicuous. Cole stood in the doorway like a bouncer guarding a memory. Evan had the quiet posture of a man who decided to show up for something he didn't yet understand. "We'll start with photographs and personal effects," I said. "Anything removed since Monday gets marked pending return on the receipt. Anything disputed is labeled hold, boxed, sealed, and signed across the tape by both sides. No one opens a hold box without both signatures. Clear?" Viv's mouth became a line. "We aren't your employees." "No," I said, which is why I'm explaining the rules. We moved like people in a kitchen too small for the recipe. Anika called out items. Lila wrote. I pointed. Cole muttered. Viv found reasons to leave the room. At the hall bookcase, Evan lifted the painting day photo, hesitated. I nodded. He set it on the hold pile and signed across the tape. His hand shook once and then steadied. We found our rhythm. What's tedious in a calm family becomes holy in a storm. We counted. We labeled. We made a place for things to belong. The doorbell rang at 10:38. Viv's shoulders straightened like a script cue. She swept out and returned with 2 people behind her. "My parents are here to observe," she announced. A tall man with ironed opinions and a golf tan stepped in first. Gerald Hale. His tie said, "Negotiator." His cufflinks said, "They still make men like me." Beside him, Elaine Hale, tasteful pearls, hair set on purpose, stood half a step back and smiled the way manners smile when they want to see blood. I shook Gerald's hand because snubbing him would give him exactly what he came for. Inventory is limited to immediate family and neutrals, I said. You're neither. We're family by marriage, he said. We're invested. Invested belongs to my banker and my auditor, I said. In-laws are guests. Guests come when invited. He chuckled. We're just here to de-escalate this unfortunate misunderstanding. When men say de-escalate, Annika murmured without looking up, they often mean stop the woman from sticking to her boundaries. Gerald's face flicked toward her, the reflex you use on a buzzing you want to swat. Ma'am, I've been in finance 40 years. I know how these things go. Then you know they start with paper, I said, sliding the Lane Family Living Trust certification across the table. And you also know this isn't your business. Viv's voice went crisp. You don't get to bar my family from my father's house. This house is trust property, I said, and you're about to argue with a piece of paper that doesn't blink. Gerald planted his feet. We can make calls. People will be very interested to hear how you've... He searched for a word that sounded legal and landed on one that sounded like Saturday dinner. Maneuvered. Call whoever you like, I said. Just not in my house. I tilted my head toward the porch, the polite way to tell a grown man to find his tone. He didn't move. Elaine touched his sleeve. Gerald, she said, soft but steel-lined. Let's wait in the car. He looked at Viv like a quarterback waiting on a nod from the sideline. She nodded. He turned slowly, the pace of a man unused to the word no when it isn't backed by a daughter-in-law's indignation. The door closed behind them with a click that felt like an exhale I'd been holding too long. Neutral, Annika said brightly, as if announcing a new dance step. We were at framed photos. Next card. We finished at 11:02. Annika totaled the sheets and stapled receipts until the little stapler sighed. 1 hour, she said, approving the shape of the morning. Dignified. Thank you, I said, and meant more than the paperwork. Lila walked me to the door. They think Gerald can scare you, she said quietly. He scares me sometimes. Scaring is cheap, I said. You grow out of it when you figure out how little you need from people who trade in it. On the porch, the air smelled like rain rehearsing. Gerald and Elaine sat in a dark SUV with the engine running, the patient, predatory stillness some men wear like cologne. I didn't look. Looking is free advertising. From inventory to boundaries. At noon in the cafe 2 blocks from the house, Annika Shaw and I split a turkey sandwich, a bowl of soup, and then went over the numbers. Friday at noon, she said, ticking off the next steps. Locks. Friday, 12:30 p.m., I said. Callum Reed. Swap cylinders, reset the keypad, cut a new master, issue fobs, restore the pre-Monday configuration. Everything into the schedule binder. I set my phone on the table. 44:18:07 kept ticking. The watches wound. The afternoon brought a quiet, more like a held note than a rest. I used it. I sent a courteous memo to the Riverside Exchange tenants reminding them to email me directly with after-hours issues and concerns. I paid the roof patch at Granary Works with a note. Thanks for catching it before it caught us. At 4 o'clock the call came. I guessed right. Gerald Hale, this time by phone, reasonable voice, charm buffed by opinion. Greta, this morning probably got off on the wrong foot. We're all family here. Some by law, some by choice, I said. That difference matters. Look, he said. Men like him always say look when they want you to look away. There's goodwill at stake. Community goodwill, too. Church, club, people talk. Best to land it soft. Sign a quitclaim on the house. We'll see to it you're comfortable. Comfortable is the word men hand to women when they mean contained. I let the thought pass through and out the other side. This conversation isn't appropriate, I said. Any further contact, please direct to Simon Everly at Everly & Sloan. He lowered his voice, reaching for intimacy like a draft under a door. You really want this public? You had a good run, Greta. Don't turn it into something it wasn't. My husband is dead, I said. Nothing here is something it wasn't on my end. I hung up before he could say my name again, like a leash. That night, I ate soup at the window and watched the countdown pulse like a rosary. I slept like someone who'd earned it. Thursday. At 32:11:22 on the clock, I made my rounds. Riverside Exchange was hushed. A tenant watered succulents in the window like a green choir. Beacon Atelier was warm, clay and coffee. Someone hummed under their breath. I set tea cakes and canapés by the mailboxes, left a note for the people who keep lights on and pipes warm. G. Sometimes property management is just sugar and a Sharpie. At 11, Lila texted, "He's calling everyone, says you stole the house." I told him I was in the room when the papers were read. He called me naive. "You're not naive," I texted back. "You're awake." By noon, a courier dropped an envelope at the Harborview Hotel. Demand to vacate, on firm letterhead, with a font designed to scare. Paragraph 1 misquoted the will. Paragraph 2 scrambled trust property with probate. Paragraph 3 threatened filings that would be kicked the second they landed. I set it beside my soup, snapped a photo to Simon. "Scrapbook," he replied. "Frame it," I said. He called 2 minutes later, papers whispering under his voice. "I'll send a short letter, 3 sentences, not to educate, to acknowledge." "I change the locks at 12:30 tomorrow," I said. "I'll be there," he said. "Men like Gerald prefer an audience to an argument. I'll bring my best listening face." By afternoon, the rain was back, tapping the glass like a polite ghost. I napped 20 minutes and dreamed of the ladder again. Arthur's hand steady on a rung, my hand steady at his back. I woke with the pillow seam pressed in my cheek, a little map of where it's safe. At 5, Evan called. He didn't waste his time or mine. I told him not to come back. He said he would anyway. He likes an audience. "We won't give him one," I said. "We were kids when you moved in," he said, voice tight with the unsaids that live in an adult child's throat. No one talked to us like adults when it mattered. We filled the silence with whatever scared us less. "I know," I said. "That's why Arthur left a letter, for you to read yourselves." He exhaled, the sound of a brick set down where a bridge might be built. "See you tomorrow," he said. Friday. Gravity. Friday morning, my pocket watch sat at 09:57, ticking steady as a reminder. The watch is wound. I ironed a white shirt, pulled on dark jeans and boots that mean I don't get pushed off a porch, hair-pinned back, and I buckled on my jade bracelet. I am the woman who wears it when she enforces a boundary. Let everyone learn my shape. At 12:15, I parked half a block away and looked at the house in winter light. A neighbor walked a dog. The dog stopped at our tree and decided it still mattered. At 12:28, Simon Everly slid in behind me and lifted a small hello. At 12:30 sharp, we stepped up the walk together. Viv opened the door before I could knock. "You can't," she began. "We have keys," I said. "We have a locksmith. We have receipts for any keys or fobs you'd like to surrender voluntarily." Callum Reed, the locksmith, came up the path with his tool case and the calm that belongs to him. "Good afternoon," he said, as if we were deciding between brass and nickel. He set the box on the hall table, glanced at the cylinder, hummed professionally. 15 minutes, he said. 20 if she's stubborn. She is, I said. I name houses the way sailors name ships. And stubborn with cause. Gerald Hale's voice carried from the living room. He stood up out of a chair he hadn't been invited to, smoothing his tie as if the room had creases. "You're not touching those locks." Simon smiled, mild. "You're not a party to this." "I represent the family," Gerald said. "You represent your interests," Simon said. "The family is here." He motioned. Cole with folded arms, Lila steady as a clean draft, Evan still and watchful by the doorway, Viv bracing a clipboard like a shield. And they were noticed for today. "I don't consent," Viv said. "You don't need to," I said. "That's the part you keep skipping." Gerald stepped in, violating the distance decent men leave between themselves and a woman who didn't invite them closer. I didn't move. He had two choices. Touch me, expose himself, or stop. expose himself. He stopped. "Call the police." He tossed over his shoulder to Cole, a general bored with parley. "Tell them there's an unauthorized person on private property," Simon offered kindly. "Makes for a great line. Not true, but it scans." Cole didn't move. He looked at Evan, then Lila, then at Callum, kneeling on the rug like a man praying to a metal god. Cole slid the phone back in his pocket. 15, Callum said, and the lock let out a small sigh only people who listen to houses can hear. We swapped 3 cylinders, logged 3 old keys, surrendered, and 6 new keys, fobs, issued. Full signatures. At 12:37, Annika Shaw slipped in with a nod, flats, and the face that snuffs nonsense. She witnessed and tallied the receipts. "Front back garage," Callum said, rising and wiping his hands. "If you want, I'll reset the keypad on the side door." "I do," I said. "The new code goes privately to those who need it." Gerald made a sound like an expensive chair dragged over tile. "You've lost control," he said, pointing at me as if labeling jars in a pantry. "You've deceived these people." "Stop," Evan said, not loud but holding, like a rivet in a wall. He faced the man like someone who'd just found the doorframe in a dark room. "You're not helping. This is our house, our family. Go home." Gerald barked a manager's laugh that means, "Who promoted you?" "Son, I'm not your son," Evan said, and the pronoun fit him. "Go home." Elaine touched Gerald's sleeve, murmuring the way a woman sounds who's tired of backing the chorus. He lifted his coat slower than necessary, as if the world would pause until he was ready. The door shut. The air got 1 degree cleaner. "Keys and fobs," I said to the room, offering the last envelope along with the last of my patients. "If anyone still has a copy not issued today, please surrender it. If not, sign to certify you hold no active key or fob." Lila stepped first, set a key in my hand with the relief of laying down a weight she never asked to carry. Cole signed his certification with a resentful flourish. Viv lifted her chin like a blade, neither surrendering nor signing. I tilted the pocket watch. The seconds hand kept on. The 96-hour fence was working, and the schedule binder in my tote sat firm as a recorded verdict. Evan set a key on the table, signed, and looked at me. "Thank you," he said. "A small right. It mattered." 96 hours, I said, touching the wound watch and opening the schedule binder. 0 is 12:30 p.m. Tuesday. If anything marked pending return hasn't walked itself back into this house by then, we move to the conduct clause. I'll hold back 15% of the next distribution per violation, and Anika will assess as a neutral with a simple report and receipts attached. After that, we leave each other alone, unless we have business or kindness. "You can't control us," Viv said. "I don't want to," I said. "Control is exhausting. Boundaries enforce themselves when you respect them." We stood in the foyer like people at the end of a play, unsure whether to clap. Callum packed his tools. Annika slid forms into the binder. Simon snapped his briefcase, the click like a judge's gavel. "Tea cakes and canapés?" I said, offering the box as if we were in any other life. "Sugar helps people sign things." Lila took one. Cole hesitated, then did. Evan shook his head and smiled. Viv stared at the box like I'd offered her a civil war. "Keep your bribes," she said. "They're not bribes," I said. "They're cakes. Bribes come with strings and a lie about who they're for." We left at 1:28. On the porch, the winter sun found my jade bracelet and woke it. "You did very well," Simon said. "So did you," I said. "You didn't even use Latin." He grinned. "I saved a little." At the end of the walk, I stopped. The house stood there. Lane House. Solid. Ordinary. The wreath looked less like a statement and more like a shop display someone forgot to take down. The new keys in my pocket had a pleasant weight that reminded me control, when it's rightful, isn't a sin. The quiet and the 2 a.m. bell. That afternoon, I went back to the Harborview Hotel, answered emails, resent the auto draft notice to the 2 Riverside Exchange tenants who never find anything the first time, and approved a small charge for a plumber who says ma'am without talking down. I had a late bowl of soup and wrote 12:30 p.m. Tuesday into the schedule binder. Nothing dramatic happened. The world didn't tilt. The phone didn't ring. I exhaled slowly. Boundaries are for building, not for staring at once they've held. At 5:15, Lila texted a photo, 2 boxes on the hall table, sealed and signed across the tape. Return, Viv. Then below it, after a pause, you could see in the pressure of the pen, Cole. I texted back, received, thank you. I meant more than the boxes. That night, I slept at home for the first time since the funeral. New keys turned lightly in new cylinders. The kitchen smelled of lemon oil and late lilies. I made tea. I stood at the sink and watched the porch light come on the way I'd taught it. I set my hand on the rail at the turn and felt the shine worn by 16 years of belonging. In the bedroom, I set my jade bracelet in its dish, smoothed the quilt, and put my phone face down on the nightstand. The house exhaled around me, like a large creature lying down. I slept like someone who'd stopped rehearsing her own erasure. In the morning, I made coffee the way Arthur liked it, and the way I like it. Those are not the same. I sat at the table with my notebook and wrote, neat and brief, 96-hour fence set, inventory resolved, locks reset, conduct clause noted. Then I drew a line. Now what? The answer wasn't revenge. It rarely is once the adrenaline leaves the room. The answer was maintenance, rent flow, roofs, an elevator with an attitude, tenants who need a little grace and a firm boundary, a life you can point to. Not a declaration, just habit. Weeks went by. Papers found their shelves. Annika sent the quarterly distributions with the small disclaimers only she can write. Practical affection is a correction in the right direction. Lila texted twice for recipes, and once to say she'd enrolled in the stewardship class. Cole sent a one-line email about a tax form. Viv stayed a weather system at the edge of the map, gusty, mostly blowing elsewhere. Evan texted a photo of a certificate from the stewardship course, 6 weeknights, 4 Saturday mornings, with the right to shadow for a quarter. A man learning the difference between an asset and a life. I stuck it on the fridge. I'm allowed to be a sentimental steward when I want. The house settled around me. One Saturday, I repainted the living room trim, laughing when I dripped on my sleeve. Of course. I kept the folding ladder steady under my own hand, not pretending I wasn't nervous. I hummed. The light moved across the floor the way it always does, as long as you remember to notice. The phone lay face down inside. The wound pocket watch and the schedule binder sat in a drawer, a relic, like the way people keep a grandmother's wooden spoon because their hand likes to remember the weight. The call came months later, at 2:11 a.m., the hour nurses and poets keep the world turning. The screen read, St. Gabriel Medical Center, and the part of my body that still looks for Arthur's hand in the night went cold, then warm. "This is Greta," I said when I picked up. At that hour, hearing yourself name yourself is useful. "Mrs. Lane?" a voice said, kind and firm, like a bridge that holds. "We're calling from St. Gabriel. We have—" She said the rest, and the house, the patient, large animal, lifted its head. I sat up, reached for the jade, buckled it in the dark by feel. The ladder in my mind had a steady hand, like always when it's time to climb. I set my feet to the floor and stood. The bedside clock, 2:13, 2:14, 2:15. Time doing its work. What we do inside it is the point. I grabbed my keys, my wallet, breathed in tea gone cool and paint gone dry in a house that knows who lives here. Then I drove to the hospital. St. Gabriel, 2:15 a.m. Truth. St. Gabriel at 2:15 a.m. is a lit ship in a dark bay. Automatic doors, antiseptic light, the beeping language of machines that refuse to sleep. I parked crooked, then straightened, the kind of woman who lines up even in a hurry. Inside smelled like hand gel and coffee that gave up its dignity hours ago. "Mrs. Lane?" a nurse asked from behind glass, using the voice people use in chapels and waiting rooms. "You're listed as the contact." "I know," I said. "Who?" though my body already knew. "Evan," she said. "He's awake. shortness of breath, chest pain. EMS brought him in about 2. He asked us to call you. There are words that change a woman's shape without leaving a mark. He asked us to call you is one of them. She led me through double doors into a hallway humming with patients and machines. In room 7, Arthur's son sat propped on a gurney, pressure cuff on his arm, a pulse ox glowing on his finger like a cheap prom ring. Evan looked up. Relief crossed his face, quick and unornamented. "Hey," he said, his voice a smaller version of itself. "Hey," I said back, taking his hand carefully around the wires. "You scared me." "I was scared," he said, an attempted smile that didn't pass inspection. A doctor in green scrubs introduced herself, Priya Menon, cardiology. Her voice had the cadence of a night shift, a prayer to help people hear their own hearts. EKG abnormalities, troponin slightly elevated. We're monitoring. Likely acute coronary syndrome. We'll cath in the morning, stent if we find a blockage. He's stable. Stable is a generous word. At 2 a.m., he wasn't. I swallowed a scarier word. The doctor met my eyes and shook her head. Not tonight. I called 911, Evan confessed, like needing help was a mistake. It clenched up like a fist. "You did the right thing," I said, brushing a fleck off the blanket because my hands needed work. "Do we need to call anyone?" His eyes slid away and back. "Lila, she'll come. Cole will swing by. Viv will bring drama. And a cardigan." Even in hospital blue, it made me smile. The nurse returned with a plastic cup of water and the kind of kindness that comes from practice, not performance. She straightened a lead, checked a number, squeezed his shoulder. 2 at a time, she said, glancing at me. "We try to keep things calm." "Calm is fine," I said. "We respect that." I texted Lila, "St. Gabriel with Evan, stable, monitoring, come if you can." Her reply in under a minute, "On my way." I notified Cole and Viv without sugar. Information is a neutral mercy if you let it be. While we waited, the room settled into that particular quiet of people who can hear their own hearts. Evan told me about the class, starting in the back row, then moving up because the instructor was funny. A budgeting exercise that made him realize he'd been driving without headlights, cooking 2 nights a week, and discovering that chopping onions can make a man honest if he lets it. He told me he woke at 1:48 with his chest suddenly smaller. He considered not calling anyone, and then did, because somewhere in him, a boy once loved by a mother, and then a stepmother, still remembers what help is for. I told him the elevator with attitude at Riverside Exchange had sulked and then behaved. A tenant left a note with a drawing of me holding a roof over a row of smiling rectangles. A Saturday spent painting trim with the ladder steady, the way it is when you respect its limits. "Do you ever hate us?" he asked, staring at the small cloud of cold air from the vent. "No," I said, letting silence hold a beat. "I hate moments. I hate how grief makes our worst habits look like good ideas. But you? No." He swallowed. "I was cruel." "You were afraid," I said. "Sometimes those two wear the same shoes." Lila arrived in a cardigan, sneakers, and the face of a woman who moved fast because love told her to. She took his other hand, gently fussed his pillow into place, then looked at me over him. A question and a thank you traded between women who didn't raise him, but in different ways helped make him decent. Cole came 20 minutes later, hair mussed, his anger leashed this time. He stood in the doorway like a gatekeeper of fear. He nodded at me. I nodded back. Some agreements are signed by small muscles. Viv came last, heels ticking on the polished floor, perfume stinging the antiseptic. She took in the wires and the screens, the way hospitals strip costumes off people. "Ridiculous," she announced to the room, meaning the situation. Naming the feeling would nick the armor. "He's 50. "Men at 50 have hearts," Lila said softly. "Sometimes they grip the day too hard." Viv looked at me, and something near apology moved behind her eyes, then hid. "I'll stay at the house," she said, as if issuing a ruling. "No," I said. "There's a hotel 3 blocks away. I'll book it on my card if you need. The house is quiet." "Quiet?" she repeated, curling the word like a bad cook grating zest over a dessert they didn't earn. "You'll keep me out when my brother—" "The house isn't a hospital annex," I said gently. "It's my home." The doctor returned with a nurse, her rhythm telling us we'd crossed a threshold. "We're moving him to telemetry," she said. "Cath lab in the morning. He's consented. Most of these are straightforward. We'll keep you updated." Consented. The word fell into the room like a bell. Evan looked at me. "You'll—" He didn't finish. He didn't need to. "I'll be here," I said, "even if it's in the waiting room with vending machine coffee and plastic chairs. That counts. It always has." They rolled him out. We stood like supporting actors suddenly without lines. "Do you need a ride?" I asked Lila. "I can drive," she said. "I'll be okay." Her eyes were wet without spilling. "Thank you for being here." "Of course," I said. Some words don't need adjectives. Cole cleared his throat. "I'll take Viv," he said. And for a second I saw him at 12 again. Dandelion hair, wanting to be useful, not yet poisoned by the expectation he had to be more. "I'm not going anywhere," Viv said. "Your choice," I said, "but not to my house." It wasn't a line in the sand. It was a border on a map where a river keeps two countries from ruining each other. She parted her lips, then closed them, picked up her bag, and followed Cole to the elevator. The doors slid shut with a soft snick like mercy. The night stretched. The waiting room is the geometry of fatigue. People lean into chairs, kick off shoes, tip their heads back. The TV mutters weather for anyone who needs a script for later. I bought coffee from a machine that believes in itself and a granola bar dense enough to wedge a door. I called and left Simon Everly a message I didn't expect him to hear before morning. "Evan's being well cared for. If anything changes, I'll call." I texted the property manager to bump a delivery. I set the phone face down. I listened to the late-night hum of a city. HVAC breathing, nurses at the desk murmur reassuring in a language made of tone. Just before dawn, Dr. Priya Menon returned wearing the face doctors wear when they're glad to bring boring news. "The cath showed a small blockage," she said. "We placed a stent. No significant damage. Meds, rest, cardiology follow-up. He's lucky." Lucky sounds different when you drive to the hospital at 2 a.m. "Shortly," she said, leading me down the hall into a room that felt like a long exhale. The gray I was afraid of had left Evan's face. He looked like a man a kind landlord had just extended. "Hi," he rasped. "I'm a cliché." "You're a man whose plumbing is back online," I said, sitting. "We'll get you a toolkit and a calendar." He closed his eyes and opened them, the way people check that the world is still holding. "I'm sorry," he said, and this time the word fell in the right place, into the space between us. Not currency, but truth. "I know," I said. "Your apology is accepted." I let that hang, whole. Forgiveness doesn't come with keys. It comes with soup, rides to cardiology, and respect for my front door. He laughed, small and real. "Soup beats keys." "Most days," I said. "I learned that late." He drifted off. I sat and listened to the small sounds of health returning, the whisper of oxygen, the quiet ticking of a heart that had decided not to cancel its lease. At the end of visiting hours, I kissed his forehead the way a mother might and stepped into the hallway, where day shift checked in and the world returned to its regularly scheduled program. In the cafeteria, the coffee had a future evaporating out of the cup. Viv sat alone at a corner table, cupping the compostable cup like it deserved protection. Her eyes were red, the red of someone the world has refused to follow her script. "I booked you a room," I said, setting the keycard on the table between the packets of salt and sugar. 3 nights, close to the hospital. I slid a small card after it. "This is the list of what the Lane Family Living Trust covers when there's a medical need for any of you. Not a blank check. Line items. Keep receipts." She looked at the card like it might combust. "I don't need your charity." "This isn't charity," I said. "It's policy. You're a beneficiary. Anika approves. I'm not allowed to play God. And neither are you." She flinched at beneficiary, that word that can make adults feel like children with their hands out. "You could let me stay at the house," she said. "Not much fight left, just a habit that hasn't learned there's a better choice." "I could," I said, "but I won't. The house has rules, and one of them is, I don't admit people who treat me like an obstacle. When that changes, the rule can change. Not before." The morning after. She looked through me at the hand-washing poster, then did her part. "He told them to call you," she said, almost matter-of-fact, almost unkind, almost kind. "Not me." "He knew I'd show up without anyone paying me," I said. "And you know it too. That doesn't divide us. It asks us to behave." She lifted the cup and set it down without drinking. "I don't know how to do this," she admitted, in a voice that didn't belong to the woman who'd stood on my porch and ordered me to pack. "I don't know how to need you." "You don't need me," I said gently. "You need yourself. You need to be the woman you are when no one's looking. Making tea at midnight for a feverish child. Repainting a room because it's the only thing you can fix. You don't have to like me to be kind. I don't have to like you to be kind." She snorted, a little huff that evaporated in the cafeteria air. "You do like me," she surprised herself, then shook her head. "No, you don't. You see me. That's worse." "It's better," I said. "It's the only way anything lasts." She slid the keycard toward herself by a fraction of an inch. "I won't steal your spoons," she said, an attempt at sarcasm that slipped, and in the slip, told the truth. I stood. "Visiting hours at 10, I said. "He'll want to see you." She nodded, a costly gesture. I honored the bill. Outside, the morning felt borrowed from early spring. The sun was pale. Breath was just a thin cloud. I called the building manager, approved a small expense, and asked for a reminder notice to the 2 tenants, who never read anything the first time. I called Simon Everly. He picked up on the second ring, pre-coffee but awake to the world. I told him the news. He made the sound men make when relief won't be loud. "Do you need anything legal?" "No," I said. "Just the medical support policy letter. I've written the bullets. Send the official." "Anika will email," he said. "She's probably up already, making a list of lists." I drove home and stood in the kitchen where the light slides in at 9. I made soup, the only edible apology that doesn't pretend to erase anything. Carrots, onions, celery, chicken. Add lemon if you want to be fancy. And today I did. I portioned it into containers and labeled them with painter's tape and a date, because clarity is a kind of nutrition. At noon, I took soup to the hospital, one for Lila, one for Cole. "Not a bribe," I said when he arched an eyebrow. "Lunch. One for the nurses' station. I have been loved by nurses. I pay my debts." I sat beside Evan while he dozed and read the boring items from the paper, because the boring is the shareable normal of a person who almost ran out of normal. I texted a photo of the pot to Anika. She replied with a heart, and beneath it, "Please submit receipts if ingredients purchased in support of a beneficiary," as if love were a ledger she could balance. Perhaps sometimes it is. That evening, back home, the porch light clicked on schedule. I stood at the sink, washed the pot, and felt quiet settle over the rooms like a blanket someone who loves you pulls up to your chin. My phone buzzed. "Evan. Best soup of my life. Not exaggerating. Context." A minute later, Viv. "Thank you for the room." Then a long pause. I could feel her wrestling and losing in a way that looked like winning. "I'm sorry about most things." The ellipses were their own treaty. "I accept your apology," I typed, paused, then wrote the sentence I want to live by. "I forgive you. My boundaries stand." It felt like setting down a bag I'd carried so long my shoulder had grown around it. Forgiveness isn't forgetting. It's remembering without carrying one more free gram. Spring. The reordering. In the weeks that followed, life reassembled without permission or apology. Evan came home with a pill organizer and a new respect for naps. He stayed in my living room 3 nights because that's what a home is for in an emergency. On the 4th night, he said, "I'm good," and meant it. I hugged him and meant it. Lila brought flowers and enrolled in the next part of the class. Cole learned to text with punctuation that didn't read like a threat. Viv sent me a link to an estate planning lecture with the note. I listened. Progress isn't a parade, it's a Tuesday with soup and fewer sharp elbows. By late May, I took out the ladder and repainted the porch rail while the light was still kind. I worked slowly because I've learned there's no prize for speed when you're repairing what you intend to keep. The neighborhood moved around me. Kids on scooters, a couple debating stain in gentle voices, the mail carrier waving with the particular generosity of someone who knows who sees you every day. I wiped a dot of paint off my wrist and noticed I'd taken 2 breaths in a row without counting. Peace arrives on soft feet. That night, after the dishes, after checking the back door and setting the pearls in their dish, I opened my notebook, a new list. What remains after money? I wrote at the top. Below it, roofs, soup, naps, letters that tell the truth. A man learning to dial 911. A woman learning to ask for a hotel key card instead of a house key. A brother closing his mouth when there's nothing important to say. A bookkeeper who remembers love can be a line item with receipts. A house that knows who lives here because she pays attention. The doorbell rang then. I glanced at the clock. 8:12. A polite hour for possibility. I wiped my hands and opened the door in the easy knowledge that the world is full of people and not all of them are trouble. On the porch stood Lila, holding a small envelope like a shy child. "For you," she said, pressing it into my palm. "From class, don't get excited." Inside was a certificate with my name as mentor. It was printed on paper that wanted to be nicer than it was, and that made me cry. "You didn't have to," I said, swiping my face. "No," she said, "but we're allowed to." We stood for a minute in the soft blue that happens right before the porch light decides whether to come on. Then she squeezed my arm and left me with my house, my list, and a tomorrow that didn't need the schedule binder or a wound pocket watch to feel like a promise. I put the certificate on the fridge next to Evan's. 2 rectangles, silly and sincere, side by side, a wealth no trust can measure. And in the quiet after, with a house breathing, a city humming, and the past staying where I asked it to stay this time, I chose again to be the woman who brings pastry and wins the watch and says yes to forgiveness, no to erasure. It isn't dramatic. It's better. It lasts. What remains after money? By August, the city smelled like hot sidewalk and tomatoes, and my calendar looked like something a person could live by. Rent reminders, filter changes, a cardiology follow-up for Evan. I didn't hover over. A note to call the roofer before the first leaf falls. I had been thinking about letting go. Grief, I've learned, doesn't leave. It only agrees to sit in the back seat if you keep the tank full and change the oil. One Saturday, when the air had the decency to be 70 degrees Celsius before noon, I drove to Beacon Atelier with a folding table, a white cloth, and a stack of paper plates. The tenants had put on a thank you coffee in the hallway, which made me laugh. Their rent pays my bills, and my bills keep their heat reliable. Somewhere in that exchange, we agreed gratitude runs both ways. Someone brought cannelé with the perfect burnt shoulder. Someone else brought a little speaker playing music old enough to know better. "Speech," they begged when I tried to hide behind the carafe. "I don't give speeches," I said, which isn't precisely true. I just give them in rooms with lawyers and a wound pocket watch beside the schedule binder. I make to-do lists. "Then read your list," said the sculptor from the 2nd floor, a fine dusting of powdered sugar on her cheek from the tea cakes she swore she didn't bake. I unfolded the paper in my pocket. "All right, fall, clean the gutters, schedule elevator service, Riverside Exchange, repaint stair rail, check the back door latch, ongoing, pay on time, answer emails in complete sentences, bring pastry when you insist." Bah, they still clapped, because there are people who will applaud a woman who keeps water off their floors. I accepted it like a bouquet that won't wilt. By noon, I was home with leftover cannelé and the good tired that comes from lifting nothing heavier than a folding table and still moving something that matters. I set the box on the counter with the comfortable honesty of someone who knows she'll eat some and freeze the rest. Then the doorbell rang. Viv stood on the porch, hair pulled back, sunglasses perched on her head like an apology. She held a jar of something red and thick. "Marinara," she said, pushing it forward like a passport. "Homemade." "Come in," I said, and meant it, because I'd decided to mean it before she asked. She paused an inch inside the threshold, like a dog deciding if the vet is trustworthy. "Just a minute," she said. I'm not staying." "Up to you," I said, "but your sauce won't get worse if you sit." She sat. We looked at each other across the kitchen table, the table that has witnessed arguments, jokes, a will reading, and enough soup to float a small boat. Her cardigan was navy. My armor was absent. That felt like progress. "Thank you for the room," Viv said again, months late and right on time. "I know I said it. I didn't mean it correctly." She tipped her chin toward St. Gabriel, how a hospital in one person's memory becomes a lighthouse, always there, even when unseen. "You meant it enough," I said. "We adjust as we go." She pulled out a folded sheet. "The class," she said. "I signed up." She bit the inside of her cheek as if she'd handed me an arm to see what I'd do with it. "If I hate it, I'll quit halfway." "You can quit anytime," I said. "You might also surprise yourself." "I don't like surprises," she sniffed. "Call them results," I said. "Less annoying." We talked 20 small minutes that make the large thing possible. She told me about a new volunteer shift at the Port Oriole Public Library, shelving books with a care that makes the world measurably better. I told her the attitude elevator at Riverside Exchange had been coaxed back into discipline, and about the sculptor's tea cakes and cannelé. We didn't touch the old battlefield. We pitched camp somewhere else. Before she left, she laid her palm flat on the table like a pledge. "I will never be your daughter," she said, not rudely. "I don't need a daughter," I said. "I need neighbors. I need to like who I am when you leave, and the trust needs you to stop imagining it's a contest and start seeing it as a schedule." She laughed, small and true, like a woman able to look straight at her own reflection. "Schedule is fine. I can do paperwork. Feelings later." "Luckily," I said, "that course is pass-fail. The professor grades for effort." She went. I labeled the jar Viv EO812 and set it on the shelf beside the lemon curd of a new old life, where the small care rituals are neither uniform nor punishment. My phone buzzed. Evan. Walk? He'd taken up evening walks as if the newly stented heart had sent an invitation, the rest of him finally accepted. We met at the park 3 blocks over, looping lazily through kids yelling at a football and a man trying to fly a kite in August wind that had no reason to cooperate. He looked well in the way of someone who's been offered a continuation and chose not to waste it. "Dr. Priya Menon says my numbers look good," he said. "Yoga is ridiculous. I still do it." "I talked to the elevator," I said. "We all have hobbies." We were quiet long enough to notice the light had slipped toward late summer gold, the kind that makes houses forgive their own paint. "I'm not asking for keys," he blurted, like a thought that had chewed through its leash. "I know," I said. "You're asking permission to never have to ask for one again." He exhaled, laughed. "That obvious?" "Yes," I said. "Approved. The door will open when it should. Your emergency net is always there. That's enough." We passed a man with a white-faced dog, the same loyal eyes I'd seen in spring. The dog looked at me, wagged with its whole back half, embarrassed by its own enthusiasm. I bent so it could sniff, then it pressed its head into my palm, the surrender of a creature that knows affection without having to write a brief. "You should adopt one," Evan half joked. "Maybe I will," I told the dog. It looked at me as if I owed it a bed and a name. "Noted," I said to Evan. Back home, I didn't open a website promising to match me with the missing 4-legged half. I washed my hands, checked the back door, and wrote on the list, "Consider a dog. Some futures only arrive when invited in writing. A schedule is a tool. September arrived with school buses, the scent of pencil shavings, and the first leaf pretending to be scandal. I met Simon Everly at a coffee shop. You don't have to forgive. He looked a decade younger than any attorney in the county has the right to look. We're in a quiet phase, he said, stirring once clockwise and setting the spoon down. Trust distributions on schedule. Conduct clause hasn't been needed. Response letters sent. Files closed. With room for air. Air is underrated, I said. Most people choose noise. I brought a draft, he tapped his case. Not an emergency term, just a provision for later. Language for a handoff plan if you adjust your role. He slid over a stack cut neat as tile. You'll like this paragraph. I did. It said plainly that stewardship is a relay. The baton transfers when both runners agree it's time. Seeing it written down let my breath out easier. I don't want to retire, I said. I want to adjust. Then call it by its name, he said. Words matter most to the ones signing them. We ate tea cakes, gratitude doing a lap. I told him about the library, the future dog, and a porch rail that dried exactly the way patience always promises. He told me about a stubborn case and a niece headed west to see what the horizon holds back. We didn't talk family beyond the professional. I learned late, and luckily, that not everything needs narration. Sometimes the evidence is simply a quiet kitchen at 6 p.m., no one scavenging for a fight. One Sunday in October, Lila arrived with a folder labeled homework and a face that had slept. We spread out at the dining table with laptops and tea. After 2 hours and 3 spreadsheets, I watched her realize she could do math without apologizing. I've always been the soft one, she said, penciling a surprise line item like it was a hymn. Maybe soft is just our family's word for being busy with feelings so the boys can run the numbers. Soft is marble before it's carved, I said. Not an insult, just a phase. She smiled at the metaphor like someone trying on a hairstyle that might suit. I like money better when it's a tool, not a mirror. Wait till it's a broom, I said, and we both laughed, because you can dust your life with a budget if you're willing. We broke for tea cakes I swore were from the freezer, then went back to the table, finding the sink 2 people get when they want to do a thing right, and the room allows it. At the door, she hugged me the quick, courteous way of women learning where to put their arms in a new chapter. I'm making chili Tuesday, she said. I'll bring some by. I remember you don't like it too hot. You remember, I said, moved by her file cabinet of attention. I always remember, she said. I just get distracted by being right. We laughed again, a pressure valve, perfectly timed. The fall of choosing. Late October, I adopted the dog. He came home with a paper collar, no name, and the solemn walk of someone who'd attended many schools, none with a graduation. I named him Ranger because I wanted a companion who looks forward. He learned the house by nose, the corner where the sun pools at 10 o'clock a.m., the exact spot on the rug where the vent's warm breath makes an oval he could claim. At night, he slept on a pad beside the bed and snored like a small saw. Turns out that sound suits my sleep better than silence. On Halloween, kids from 3 blocks over rang and stood under the porch light in costumes with opinions. Ranger endured their outrage at raisins with the patience of a saint. Lesson learned. Next year I'll buy better candy. Evan swung by at 9 and fixed the porch light timer, which had decided 6:37 was midnight. He stood on the lowest rung while I steadied the ladder. For one funny moment, we became the photograph of my life, older and more correctly placed than any portrait I'd imagined years ago. You don't need me to do this, he said when the timer came back to life. I don't, I said, but it's good for you. He laughed, bright and clean. The doctor says community service counts toward cardiac rehab. The doctor's a genius, I said. I'm prescribing lunch with your stepmother. Booked, he said. The next day we went to a place that serves soup in bowls so big you look small-minded if you don't finish. Apparently we looked generous enough that the server brought extra bread without asking. November softened into sweaters and lists. I invited the family for Sunday pie the week before Thanksgiving. The invitation was simple: 3:00 p.m., apple and pumpkin. No arguments. Shoes off at the door. Ranger may have crumbs, just one day. They came. Viv brought whipped cream, sweet enough. Cole brought coffee and the willingness to drink it without commentary. Lila brought napkins folded into leaves. Of course she did. Evan brought himself. We ate informally and with pleasure. When the talk threatened to skid toward managers and accusations, I lifted my hand with the same authority I've used on an elevator with an attitude. "We're here for pie," I said, "not policy." They laughed and obeyed. Somewhere in that obedience, I felt something like respect settle where suspicion used to live. I sent them off with foil-wrapped slices and wrote in my notebook, with a rare underline, "Sometimes we can be ordinary together." Winter returned with the clean honesty of cold and the smell of roofs remembering their promises. I walked Ranger on mornings slick enough to remind me I'm not made of rubber, came home and read the paper like a person living a life she chose. Lane Family Living Trust sent the quarterly distribution with footnotes I could recite in my sleep. Annika added a line: "Medical reimbursement, Viv, hotel meals." Form stapled to receipts. Someone had learned to submit paperwork like an adult. I initialed with a satisfaction that doesn't brag. The ladder and the box. 1. Tuesday in December, I met Teresa Morales at Harbor State Bank in the small room that smells like paper and decisions. We locked a refinance rate for Granary Works, carved out a modest reserve for future capital, set reminders. She looked at me the way professionals look at each other when they respect shared competence. "Your files are a dream," she said. "Thank you," I said. I talked to the elevator and the bank the same way. Saves time. Outside, I passed a couple whisper arguing whether a loan is hope or humiliation. I wanted to hand them cannelé and a schedule. Instead, I held the door. Sometimes people need to feel preferred before they can be reasonable. Back home, I made coffee and took down the box on the shelf. The pocket watch, wound. The schedule binder with lines neatly crossed through. Arthur's letter to the children we'd read in the room where anger learned to sit down. I set the pocket watch in a drawer, useful there without holding power. I slid schedule under the grease-spotted recipe box, proof that some of the best strategies are born in kitchens. I folded the letter and tucked it into an envelope hand-labeled, "For later, for good days." Later is a place you can build. On New Year's Eve, I didn't stay up, but 12:03 still popped me awake with distant fireworks and Ranger's commentary. I stroked his head with what people call instinct. Really, it's practice. "It's just the year turning," I said. "Tomorrow, we all pretend to be new." In January, Port Oriole Public Library asked me to teach a Saturday Fix Your Life workshop, a smart name for budgeting without feeling stupid. I said yes. I showed up with tea cakes and cannelé, a whiteboard, and an eraser, and wrote at the top, "What remains after money?" The room laughed when I answered, "Roofs, soup, naps, letters, dogs." Then they nodded, as if I'd performed a magic trick with no gimmick. Lila sat in the back, fielded questions with muscle in her calm. Cole dropped in once and asked about retirement without flinching. Viv ghosted past the door twice, then came in, sat in the last row, took notes. Didn't look at me, except once when I intentionally wrote a number wrong so someone else could catch it. "You did that on purpose," she said at the pastry table. "Sometimes people need to catch something," I said. "It makes the team real." "Team," she repeated, trying on a coat in a color she used to avoid. "That's a dangerous word." "It's a better risk than winner," I said. She nodded, a concession I once mistook for defeat. Now I recognize it as a decision. The year went on the way years do when you stop trying to wrestle them to the floor. We repainted the old brick building's hallway. I taught Ranger to wait at the door. He does it with the patience of a senior statesman. Evan learned to like oatmeal. The accountant learned to mail holiday cards with a joke on the back. "File joy with receipts." Simon took his first vacation in too long and sent me a sunset photo captioned, "No legal review required." On the anniversary of the day Arthur held the ladder steady while I pretended not to worry, I brought the ladder out and touched up the rail where his hand had rested the most. I wore the jade bracelet. I wear it when I'm actively choosing who I am. When I finished, I sat on the step and looked around. The walls have held scenes I could never script. The porch light knows when to come on. The floor doesn't creak because it has nothing to confess. The doorbell rang. I wiped my hands and opened the door to Cole, holding a carton the size of a toaster. "From the attic," he said, almost shy, labeled sewing. I didn't open it right away. We set it on the table and cut the tape. He held the lid as if it might be the lid of something larger. Inside were pieces of fabric folded by a woman who believed in keeping things, a tomato pincushion with a little strawberry hanging off it, a handful of buttons that had kept their closeness through decades of drawer chaos. At the bottom lay my grandmother's note, "For when you want to mend instead of replace." We stared at it too long, because sometimes the past gives you a line so clean you don't want to smudge it with talk. "You keep it," I said at last. "No," he shook his head. "It belongs to the house." He closed the lid with unexpected gentleness. "Some things do." After he left, I sat with the box, Ranger's head on my knee, and the afternoon light walking the floor as if it knew where it was going. I threaded a needle because my hands wanted to remember something useful, and mended a small tear in the quilt with stitches tiny enough to count as loyalty. That night, I set the jade bracelet in its dish, flipped my phone face down, and added one more line under "What remains after money." Knowing when to mend. I turned out the light. The house exhaled. Ranger sighed. The street murmured its ordinary song. Tomorrow, I'll meet the roofer, check the gutters, and buy better candy in January. Because it's cheaper and sits straight on the shelf like common sense. I'll teach a class where someone will ask if a budget is a trap, and I'll say they're fences. And fences have gates if you install them. I'll send a distribution, a recipe, and a photo of a dog asleep in an oval of sun to a family thread that's learned to keep more than it drops. I don't need to wind the pocket watch anymore. The schedule lives in the rhythm. The legacy I keep is what I can spend on a Tuesday without asking anyone's permission. And in a small life built from large choices, I sleep, held on purpose by the house I chose and the boundaries I set like trim. I'll repaint when it needs it, not a minute sooner. If this story touched you, drop a like and consider subscribing. Leave any comment below, even a single word. Maybe tell me where you're watching from or what time it is right now. Sometimes one word is enough to say you were here.